generally B2B companies are using paid social, LinkedIn, or a Meta, Facebook, Instagram, even to the YouTubes or other things, are using it a majority or 100% for lead generation. So if there is not a lead generated from the spend, it is deemed by the company to be a waste of money. And then they'll decide how to put budget based on what the average cost per lead is by campaign or by channel, trying to optimize for the lowest cost MQL or lead. And that's generally what most companies are doing. You could look at that as demand capture. It actually defies the definition of demand capture. In order to capture demand, there has to be intent to be captured. There's not intent here generally in this channel if you look at it objectively. And so it's really just buying email addresses and quote unquote collecting leads. It's not even really demand capture. The alternative to how you could use this is to use, a paid social strategy on these types of channels to create demand, not to build brand awareness where people, know your company, to make people want to fucking buy your product, and to use the activities to use the paid channel as a content distribution, a guaranteed way to deliver content to your target customers or the influencers of those deals inside of companies, that then the content goes out to them, they consume it, they share it inside of, their company's Slack channel or the leadership Slack channel, and they're talking about it at the next meeting. And then you do that over and over for a year or 6 months or for sometimes 2 weeks. And over time, that company decides now we need to go and investigate whether we need to solve this business problem. This company helped us understand the business problem. Most likely they can help us with the business problem. Let's go talk to them. So the strategy shift is moving from using paid social to generate leads to using it to guarantee distribution of content to your target accounts in placements and in mediums where it's actually consumed. So that's the shift. And then the question is, why is now the right time to shift your paid social strategy? Really, the right time to shift your paid social strategy was 2016. That's when mainly when I started doing a lot of this stuff. But you know what they say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time to plant the tree is today. So I guess right now is the best time to shift your paid social strategy if you haven't already. If you look at the data, generally, the data will be blindly obvious that you should do this. If you look at anything outside of cost per MQL or cost per stage one or opportunity created, which is not that far away from an MQL, and you look at it to customer acquisition costs just on the advertising spend, just that shift in view of how you evaluate the programs will help you see that you should shift your strategy, and you should probably, if you got one option to shut it off, which a lot of companies do, and they say, oh, LinkedIn doesn't work for us, so we're going to stop the $50K a month in LinkedIn, and we're just going to move that $600,000 a year and put more money in Google, which a lot of companies do. And they write off LinkedIn instead of writing off the outdated, shitty strategy that they run on LinkedIn. And so the core message here, it's not that LinkedIn doesn't work, it's that what you're doing inside of LinkedIn doesn't work. LinkedIn works as a channel. You can buy the media, you can get to almost any B2B professional. It gets even better with executives. The targeting's the best in the industry. The consumption in feed is very strong. LinkedIn works, both organic and paid, ideally combined together. And so just thinking about how, this question wasn't really about how to shift your strategy. Maybe we'll get to that later, but that's generally the reason why. That the data show that your own performance data, if looked at in this view, will tell you to shift your strategy. Cool. And let's see. Yeah, I want to make sure I don't use examples that were under NDA as I read this stuff off. Next one. I love this question. And so it's about having a smaller target market, or how do you approach a strategy like this when you can only sell to 5,000 accounts, which is exactly the situation that I was in when I started to develop a lot of these things in 2016. There's 5,100, at least at that time, there was 5,100 total hospitals in the United States. So we had that many accounts. And then if you even segmented it down to tier 1 and tier 2, it was only 2,000. So a very small total addressable market, Big employee count in there, like big buying group, big deals, right? As the TAM goes down, typically the deal size and deal complexity goes up. Not always, but generally it happens. And so what needs to change when you only are marketing to 2,000 accounts instead of 2 million or 200,000? Like if you're an SMB motion with a low cost transactional product, 4K ACV, you shift that to 400K ACV and you got 2,000 accounts. The big change to think about is effectively when you put out content or you run advertising or things like that, are you actually reaching the small finite group of people that can influence or make the decision to buy your product? A good example of this is SEO. Like if I had 2,000 accounts to go after, I would optimize SEO for a couple of core terms that I know those people are going to buy when they're in buy mode. But I would not be writing long tail SEO blogs hoping that, the 20,000 people that can influence a decision for my product are going to search that. So you basically, I think you spend less time trying to have people find you and you spend more time going proactively to them. Whether that's, a lot of companies choose outbound sales for that reason, but you can also use paid social as potentially a far more effective way to reach those exact people than in an email in a more scalable, consistent way as well. And so I'm going to go farther into paid social because I think it's the place where where I haven't talked about it as much and I can add the most value here. Like let's look at LinkedIn ads, for instance. You have 2,000 accounts. The thing that changes for companies is companies always think, okay, we're going to scale the media spend. But if you only have 2,000 accounts and there's only 20 people in those accounts that can influence decisions, you're only going to be able to push the media so far. You can push the media maybe to 20,000 a month. I'm just doing the rough math in my head. So at that audience size, you're never going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. So how do you scale? You scale through creating volume of content. Becomes the real scale driver. As TAM goes down, then you invest more and more in content. So a normal company might say, we're going to spend 20 cents in content. A normal company actually doesn't say this, but if you thought about it, you might say this. We're going to spend 20 cents for content for every dollar we spend on ads. Some smart CMOs have gotten to that level through scale where one CMO that I know is we're going to invest 32 cents in content and creative for every dollar we spend on advertising. It was that precise. But when your TAM is small, it might be we spend 82 cents on content and creative and we spend 18 cents on actual media buys and advertising. And so the shift happens and then okay, so when you spend the 82 cents, the difference between a big TAM and a small TAM, how do you spend that extra 50 cents on every dollar? Subject matter expertise, deep experts, KOL relationships. Who are the very small amount of people that influence the decision for those 2,000 companies? For us, it was very finite. There was 5 physicians that all these 2,000 hospitals that we cared about, the 5 physicians they would listen to, or the 5 hospitals they would get the clinical practice from. And so how do we go, even if that hospital or person isn't using our product, how do we go build a relationship with them? How do we have them on our podcast? How do we prop up the studies that they've done that support our category, but not necessarily our product? And use those as expenses that we use to create content because we're not spending as much on advertising. And frankly, even companies that spend a lot on advertising are dramatically underinvesting in content. And so whether your TAM is, it's weird as I go through this, even if your TAM is 2,000 or 200,000, the idea of investing more in content and creative and less on media probably applies across the board. I think there's been I can't actually even think of one case where I thought that a company was properly investing in content creation relative to their paid social media spend. There are a lot of companies that have a show. They have a separate, multiple CMOs that I've worked with have a separate website where they have shows and content and thought leadership and things like that. But when they go to execute their media strategy, never bring that content into their media strategy. And last point here, and then we'll move on to the next one because I got 4 bullets. That just like spending $12,000 on an ebook to run ebook lead gen is not what I'm talking about when I talk about investing in content. It's investing in content and creative for native consumption inside of the channel. And lastly, having a small TAM fucking rules. You know every single account. The data, like, they're so small that you can know every single person that holds the budget. You can know the exact people inside of the company that are influencing those decisions. You can be so much more targeted, personalized, precise. You can invest more to win every single deal. You can do different, because the deal sizes are generally bigger. You could do an event for every single account in pipeline. Because it's worth it to go and have your CEO fly or your executive team fly and go have a dinner with their executive team to close that $500,000 a year deal that maybe you expand to $1.2 million in year 2. All those things become in play that are never in play when you sell a $6,000 a year deal. So bigger deal sizes generally mean more allowable cost of acquisition, which means that we can be more creative and invest more to acquire every single customer when it comes to our marketing and sales programs. So the overarching principles that I talk about in marketing and in sales, for that matter, don't change that dramatically based on your TAM. Like, the fundamentals are the fundamentals. But then when you get into the tactical sort of decision making and what you do for those two, the tactics and how you invest the money actually do become quite a bit different. We got a good one here. This is like a fictitious scenario that would never happen, but let's talk about it. We had a question come in. It says, Chris, if you had to still execute a lead gen strategy, think 20% of our marketing budget spent on lead gen, what targeting strategy would you deploy to achieve both lead and demand gen go-to-market motions? Your answer can't be don't do lead gen. So if I was going to have 20% of the spend on lead gen, and to be clear, like, if you think about lead gen and demand capture as synonymous, but they're not really, but I, like in this case, I'm going to kind of look at it that way, that I would probably spend 20% on demand capture. It would be investing in our website, buying a key set of terms in Google paid search. Maybe I invest a couple $1,000 a month in review sites that become a lead gen mechanism, and I would just appropriately invest in demand capture channels as a mechanism for lead generation. What people wanted to hear in this answer is like, okay, Chris, how are you going to run LinkedIn to do lead gen? That's what they want. That's what they wanted to know. So I'll give you a couple ideas, even though I probably wouldn't do it this way. We've been seeing some great stuff with Vault members of using LinkedIn Spotlight ads as a mechanism for conversion in retargeting that I think is kind of interesting. And so I think there's some plays there, whether that be for a free trial or a proof of concept, or even any other type of high value offer. Using Spotlight ads where you only pay for the click and you're going for a direct conversion based on retargeting audiences, and maybe even have additional account filters on top of that, I think is an interesting mechanism. I think that perhaps by either combining like just first party pixel data or first party account intent data to true high value first party interactions like pricing page visit, went to the demo page or something like that. And then thinking about, and I'm really thinking out loud here, I'm like, this is stretching me. And then when you run the media to produce a piece of information that directly has the people in the account sharing that information with the decision maker, which could be, hey, let's just pretend we're running an ad for my company. Like, hey, 6 cents. Did you see what we did for demand base? And then have all the stats underneath it. I think that there's some like personalized mechanisms like that could be really useful when you think about like lead gen or sharing. That approach is really sharing of content as I think through it. but that's like my conscious stream of thoughts. I think that if you look at lead gen and you consider the investments that happen in paid search and review sites and events that we use to get leads and things like that, the companies spend a ton of money there already when you even without looking at social. And so why can't we think about social as looking at it across the whole budget in a balance and say, okay, we already spend 90% of our budget on demand capture activities. What if we just take the 100,000 we have budgeted for LinkedIn and use it for demand creation instead of having that also be used for collecting leads? Part of it is using the channel appropriately, and part of it is looking at your total budget allocation and having a balanced mix between demand capture and demand creation based on your company's maturity, your category maturity, your overall business stage, and then what you're seeing in the data. Last one, let's keep rolling. And it's weird, like sort of reading this off of a cell phone as we do this. Our marketing media budget is pulling back 20% next year, and we won't have budget to scale effectively on LinkedIn and our audience size. How do you begin to prioritize the buyer committee to ensure proper ad frequency and budget is utilized? Let's look at this question in two angles. The first angle, our marketing budget is pulling back 20% next year, so we won't have the budget for LinkedIn. That assumes that you've like sort of made the decision that out of the 80% of the pie that you have left, that LinkedIn performance or subjective decisions from executives, whoever decides the budget, has deemed that out of the 80% that we shouldn't have that be on LinkedIn. It could often a reflection of the historical performance of LinkedIn that we help companies see in their lead gen strategy. But like I said, it's not that LinkedIn doesn't work. It's that how LinkedIn is being used is not working. And so the first conversation should be, if we're going to cut budget by 20%, where should we be cutting? And should companies go to LinkedIn immediately, and they'll even cut LinkedIn and increase Google while the data even in Google is poor? So where should we be cutting overall? And is LinkedIn going to be from 100,000 a month to 0, or should it be 100,000 a month to 40? And then we should go and get the other 60 from our events, content syndication, the waste of money we spend on all the marketing technology that we're in contracts for, and things like that. Once we get past that, then the next question is, how do you begin to prioritize the buyer committee to ensure proper ad frequency and budget is being utilized? There's a couple of different angles that you could take to this, and it also depends sort of on your total addressable market and your deal size. One way to do it, we sold it like back in the day. What I would do, we sold to 2,000 or I guess 5,000 total accounts. At that point, what I was doing was I was really marketing to the persona. And like we have 5,000 accounts, and we're marketing to the respiratory director and the director of procurement and the risk management person and the director of the ER. And the people, and all of those different groups are not necessarily a buying committee. It's 5 different entry points to get into that account and then expand from there. And so when you have a small TAM, sometimes multi-product, sometimes single product, you can have a lot of different for initial entry points into an account. And then after that, use account management and customer success to grow. But let's just say you sell single product, single buyer, like you're selling a sales tech solution to sales leaders. But the buying committee might be, you could look at the blockers and the CFO and those types of people. You could look at the CMO. You could look at the people underneath them. But generally, depending on if the TAM was big, then I would just put like sales leadership, marketing leadership, anyone's VP up, and I would just be marketing, because you may not know who are the critical people inside of that company that make a decision, and you may not invest the time to figure that out when you have 200,000 accounts to sell to. So you're just going for, function seniority at target, identified account, and marketing that way. That's like generally one way that you could do to the buyer committee. Some companies get overly complex in this, and it's a post that I write about. I see a lot of unproductive complexity in campaigns where you're selling to an account and you have a different ad for the director of procurement and then you have a different ad for the sales leader, and you have a different ad for the CFO, which might have value if you're selling 7-figure deals, but it doesn't have a lot of value in terms of the operational complexity and the cost to support those campaigns and the content to feed those campaigns if you're selling a $10,000 or even $30K ACV deal. So you really have to think about the deal size when you think about buying committee. Most people that are talking about buying committee are selling bigger deals. Another thing to think about if your budget is going down is, should we not market to every account? Is there a subsegment of accounts, maybe the 5,000 out of the 100,000 that we should really be marketing to, and not just because of intent data, but because they're best fit accounts that we should be creating demand and capturing demand with? A lot of companies that try to have decreased budget decide, hey, we're only going to market to in-market accounts or 6 QAs, or we're only going to do retargeting, which has value, but just recognizing that the other 99% of your market that isn't a 6 QA and isn't buying, isn't getting marketed to at all, and then recognizing that if one of your competitors came along and did a proper execution of events and paid social and a podcast and evangelism and some of these things that I talk about a lot, and one of your competitors did that over a year or two, they would build a significant competitive advantage against you and start to take market share. So, Sydney, any things that you wanted me to hit on specifically before we move to the open questions?
I did get a DM about the paid social strategy. So they're basically determining if they should just cut their budget on lead gen or cut their budget by a little bit on lead gen and shift to kind of a demand gen, category halo approach that we talk about, and why that would be, what argument you would make towards that versus cutting it all off.
I would look at can I get my headphones back? Now I kind of feel like a test.
We'll just take a quick pause.
Yeah. The first thing that I would do is run the scenario of if you cut it all, and then look at all the budget and then put it into the categories. Just say demand creation, demand capture, demand conversion, and make an honest assessment of what you're trying to do with all that budget, and then assess, do we have a balanced strategy here? You could make a secondary assessment of, do we need a balanced strategy here? Some companies may not. You're 2 million ARR, you sell, a contact database, you can go and fight for the $1 billion of existing demand in that really competitive space, and you can probably grow from 2 million to 4 million next year by not doing any demand creation. But for most of us, we have to do some real shit, because the strategy of being the 57th player in a big market selling a commodity product is not that interesting. So look at the budget and evaluate it, and then identify if there's a hole in demand creation, which there will be, most likely, and then say, okay, if we were just going to allocate 10% of the budget to demand creation, how much money would that be? It'd probably be way more than the budget we're talking about for LinkedIn to cut. And then you might end up that you actually have 3 things that you're investing for in demand creation. You lower the budget a little bit on LinkedIn because you need to prove it works first, but then you're also going to have an influencer marketing play and your CEO post on LinkedIn or whatever you decide. It's really about it's not about looking at LinkedIn in a vacuum and saying we're going to cut LinkedIn. It's looking at the entire budget overall and saying, are there places where money is being wasted already that would be better? I'll give you an example. In 2016, I really wanted to invest in digital. The business that it was 100% field and sales enablement. Our website sucked. We didn't produce any content. We didn't run any digital advertising. We didn't even we didn't have any MarTech except for Salesforce. We had no tracking, and we got no business from our website. And it was 2016, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Our website should be our number one salesperson, should drive the most revenue in our company at the highest sales velocity. And so I was we got to go find money for digital. And so I begged for a $5,000 test budget on Facebook first. I made that $5,000 work like it was $500,000. I produced 4 sales qualified opportunities that led to 2 closed won deals. I was able to show that we spent $5,000 and we generated 60K in initial ARR. And getting into an account for us was a huge expansion opportunity. We could 50x first year ARR over a couple of year period of time with expansion revenue, and showed that it worked. And then I had a business case to put together, and I was like, okay, I think that we should scale up and we should spend 25 here, and then if it works, we should spend 50K a month here. And they were like, we don't have any more money. And I said, okay, well, we spend money for 15 trade shows every year, and I've been to most of the trade shows, and most of them are a waste of money. So why don't we go to 3 next year? Why don't we all pick the 3 that we think we should go to the best? They were the ones where we had the biggest booth and they were the biggest expense. Where we cut all the bottom 12 events. That gave us it was approximately $1.2 million a year when you think about booth expenses, sponsorships, T&E, brochures and collateral and all that type of stuff. So then you got $1.2 million, which is $100,000 a month. And then we didn't spend anywhere close to 100,000. I think some of the stuff got reallocated to product marketing and product development and other parts of the company. And then we had like 50K a month that we spent on digital. And it was like 8,000 a month on Google and 42 to 50,000 a month on Facebook and Instagram. And at that, it's different now. The dynamics are different, but it was a pretty small amount on LinkedIn advertising at that time. And so it's not necessarily like, when you look at the whole budget and then you think about the strategy, then you might find other places where the money should be, where the cuts should be happening, not on LinkedIn. Like arguably, LinkedIn is the best place to reach your customers today in the world. Out of anything that you could do besides like showing up and knocking on their door, and even that, they're probably going to close the door on your face and say, fuck off, go away. That like LinkedIn is arguably the highest ROI place to reach all of your target customers at scale every single day or multiple times a week. To think that we shouldn't be spending any money there, and while we spend millions of dollars in other things that we do in marketing, I think is borderline irresponsible, misguided.